All right. Mia, would you like to go first?
Hello. Oh, wow.
Yes.
I
Introduce
don't.
yourself again, please.
Yes, ma'am. I will. I don't know how to follow up all of that. What we heard today. It's been very insightful. My name is Mia LeJeune. I'm a junior at the Manship School of Mass Communication. I currently serve as the president of Go Vote and simultaneously serve as an ambassador to the Andrew Goodman Foundation. Last summer, I was a governor's fellow at the Department of Children and Family Services, where I learned a lot about sexual and domestic abuse. Currently, I am a candidate for student body president with my friend Angelina Cantell, the current president of Tigers Against Sexual Assault. I'm looking forward to one day being another female voice on the Board of Supervisors as student body president. I want to start by thanking the women of the committee, especially Chairwoman Barrow, for calling this hearing today and allowing me to speak on behalf of the students at LSU. I also want to take a moment to thank and encourage all of the survivors who could be with us today and those who couldn't. Your bravery and courage has been a testament to the soul and tenacity of the women of LSU, Louisiana, and beyond. Thank you for sharing your stories so that we can fight for a safer school, community, and state. I'm planning to focus on LSU and Louisiana's higher education institutions' financial crisis that in turn is affecting survivors, but some brief mentions of sexual assault may be triggering. When the Hush Blackwell report last week was released, I was personally not surprised, but rather disappointed by the lack of organization within the Title IX office and how drastically these critical teams on our university are understaffed and underfunded. Along with the countless narratives speaking to the negligence of our administrators, one line in the report particularly stood out to me. It reads, from 2008 to 2017, LSU's budget was cut a remarkable 16 times, while the university's budget was facing drastic cuts in unfunded compliance obligations, including compliance mandates around Title IX and Section 504, were exploding in significant ways. Given the myriad of challenge created by these budget cuts, it is perhaps understandable that the Title IX office was not staffed appropriately. However, the most important finding from the review is that there was and is not, that it was and is not. And until the Title IX office is staffed appropriately, the vast majority of concerns identified through this report will likely continue to plague the university. Doing more with less simply does not work in this space. An article by the LSU student newspaper, the Daily Reveille, reported that from 2008 to 2019, simultaneous to the state's record-breaking budget cuts, tuitions for students rose by 98.6%, nearly $5,000 per student. At LSU, tuition and fees were increased by 155%. Students pay 80% and the state pays 20%. When the state does not accept and pay its fair share of costs to the universities, students suffer. When the Title IX office is not fully funded or understaffed, students are not prioritized and the system neglects them. Not funding our university puts students at risk and forces them to take on the unnecessary burdens of the state. To borrow and emphasize a point made by a survivor at the Board of Supervisors meeting, we would not be here today had a national report from USA Today put Louisiana and LSU in a negative spotlight. Our higher education institutions have been at the bottom priority list for some lawmakers for decades, and students are suffering because of it. Sexual assault survivors, graduate students, students of color, and everyone at the university has been impacted by state budget cuts to higher education. This body must take responsibility for their gross negligence and must pledge to take action today. You are directly responsible for the institutionalized violence that occurs against students. Even when the cameras are no longer watching and the PR stunts have played out, don't forget about the students and missions you sought to accomplish today and should have addressed years ago. Survivors and students will still be fighting because for us, this issue doesn't just fade away. We live in the reality every day that our school does not cherish, value, or prioritize our safety. Louisiana prides itself on its sense of community, and LSU is a pillar of that community. But the football team is not the only entity that makes our school special. We have band kids, student activists, sorority members, engineers, international students, communicators, artists, female athletes, and individuals committed to learning and growing at our university. We are LSU too. We are part of the Louisiana community. That should be reflected in the funding we receive from this legislature. I want to be clear that I have the utmost respect and love for LSU, Louisiana, and this legislator. But when you love something, you have a responsibility to be critical of it. Right now, I am disappointed in the actions of the university leaders and the failure of this state to fully fund our schools and make up for the years of challenges and unnecessary burdens on students. The time is now to do more for our community. Students cannot be expected to move on if you, our legislators and administrators, aren't prepared to reckon with the mistakes of the past. We are tired of carrying this burden and this fear. Step up. Don't let this slip your mind like we did years ago. We can't create this culture you all reference without accountability across all levels: LSU, the president's office, the legislator, and even the governor. For the administrators here today, fire and punish those who allow this violence and disgrace to continue. LSU students and students across this state deserve more, and you sold us out. For once, prioritize students and our needs. Fire Verge Osbury and Miriam Seeger and anyone else involved in these heinous crimes. For the legislators, prioritize funding and support our higher education institutions. Follow up on your policies and make sure that they are working for students. Make yourself accessible to them. They are your constituents. Ask yourselves, do the constituents in your district who are students even know your name? Do they know how you are protecting them and what you are doing to actively protect them? All in all, you represent us, so please stop playing partisan politics with our lives. Take action against this injustice now and fully fund our schools, and encourage your fellow lawmakers to do the same, or else our best and brightest will leave. Like Morgan said just a few moments ago, it's easy now when the survivors are in front of you, but are you willing to do what is hard later? We, the students, need that confirmation from every member here today and beyond. I marched with my fellow students after the USA Today article was released months ago. We sat for hours outside calling for action on Monday. We were ridiculed, laughed out, and threatened. But after the testimonies today, clearly we are still not being heard. I promised my fellow students as their candidate that I wouldn't be afraid to speak up and put my foot down with you all, legislators and administrators. You've heard from the survivors, and we're here now, looking into your eyes and speaking to your hearts. We aren't going away this time. It's time for you to do more now. Thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you. Very good job.
Hey everyone, my name is Angelina Cantell. As Mia mentioned, I am the president or co-president of Tigers Against Sexual Assault. I also co-founded that organization with the other president, Angel Upshaw. I'm also an intern at STAR, which has gotten a lot of shout outs today. And I want to say that I'm very thankful for all the work that I've been able to do and witness other people do at STAR. And I want to say that while most of what I have to say has to do with my experience as a student leader at LSU advocating for these issues, that I completely agree with Morgan that this is an issue that all of Louisiana faces and that it lies on this legislator to make a difference. I'm strangely emotional and going off the script I wrote, but I'm thinking about one time when Representative Carpenter told me to never let them see me cry. And I think that this is just such a sensitive topic, and we've talked about burnout for people who work with it, but there's burnout for students too, especially survivors. But every student at LSU, survivor or otherwise, advocate or otherwise, I think is burnt out. Especially this year. It has been a hard year to hear about the university you love fail in so many ways. And I'm thankful for President Galligan and for other members of the administration who have listened to me and others beforehand, and who have seen me cry before. But I am, of course, most thankful to every survivor whether they have spoken up or otherwise, for being so brave to carry that trauma every day, and for those who have shared publicly in the USA Today article and the reporters who published that article. Myself and so many members of the LSU community could never be more in debt to you. I also want to acknowledge, like Mia mentioned, that a lot of what has been discussed today, including what I'm going to discuss, may be triggering to survivors of sexual trauma. When USA Today published LSU's failures in handling allegations of sexual assault in November of 2020, it confirmed what so many survivors, students, faculty, and staff had shared with me about their experiences at LSU. In November, TASA had only existed for less than a year, but we already had so many people reach out to us in those months asking for us to advocate for improvements in a multitude of areas relevant to LSU's Title IX processes. Even Title IX employees had expressed that they were understaffed and unvalued. The brave survivors who chose to come forward and the USA Today reporters who published their stories allowed us to have hard proof of the culture we have been hearing about for months. The protests we organized, where nearly 300 students came out to express their anger, showed people across Louisiana that this was not an issue that can be pushed under the rug. LSU answered our concerns by saying that once Hush Blackwell concluded its investigation, they would take action. Now, a 262-page report detailing over 30 years of gross negligence by LSU has been released. And while LSU is committed to some long-needed changes, myself and many other students do not feel it is enough. As we've mentioned several times today, employees who have been clearly shown to have covered up allegations of sexual and domestic violence have not been fired, even with the Hush Blackwell report providing evidence of their wrongdoing. On Monday, TASA organized a sit-in at the Football Operations Center because while this issue extends past athletics, the privileges that student athletes are given play a key role in why these employees behave the way they did. They believed it was more in line with their job description to protect a student athlete than to protect a survivor of sexual assault. Our presence was not received well by some athletes and employees, although this issue is deeply relevant to them, further proving how far we have to go to see real change. Mia mentioned it a little bit, but we were laughed at by male and female employees alike. We were threatened by student athletes. We were cursed at and told publicly and on social media that we were simply speed bumps in the road while we were sitting in. After the sit-in, I sat in a meeting with President Galligan, Provost Haney, other administrators, and some of the strongest student leaders I have ever met. Myself and others broke down and cried in front of these administrators, further showing them the emotional toll the lack of proper disciplinary action is taking on their students. On the issue of discipline, there are so many pages in the Hush Blackwell report that prove employees have done wrong. The interaction that Abby so bravely mentioned earlier between her father and Julia Sell is also mentioned in the Hush Blackwell report, and yet no action that was publicly acknowledged at the Board of Supervisors meeting on Friday has been taken against Julia Sell. I want to recognize that I'm really tired of hearing how LSU has done something that no other university has done with this report. I don't care what other universities are doing. I am a student at LSU, and I care about what LSU does to protect its students. I don't want to hear that there was no standard in place, because like so many of you have mentioned already, morality is clear, and it should not be hard to distinguish what is right and wrong. Senator Peterson mentioned earlier that she feels powerless, and to be quite frank with you, myself and my fellow student leaders have felt very powerless this week. So many people have been asking us to organize other protests and other demonstrations demanding that these people can be fired. And I personally do not know if I can do it again. I don't know if I have the strength to continue fighting. And I'm very thankful for my boss, Angela from Star, who encouraged me to keep fighting earlier this week. But it is draining, and I'm tired of having to do this. Something that is often repeated amongst LSU student leaders, especially in student government, is that we feel like we constantly have to be the ones to fight for change. And sometimes we wish that this legislator and that the university administration would just do it for us without us ever having to ask. The things we often ask for are very clear things that students need. And I'm tired of all of it being pushed under the rug. When it comes to discipline, a lot of people have been saying that it feels like the university is more a football team than a school. President Galligan earlier referred to the head football coach as the most powerful person in Louisiana, And I think we could all agree, including President Galligan, that that is messed up. And that is something that goes beyond LSU. It is a culture of this entire state to value a game over actual survivors of sexual assault and so many other injustices that have been done by student athletes who time and time again are excused. I want to say that the conversations that have occurred today are long overdue. And now I want to mention something that happened in November, which I did not plan on mentioning originally. And I want to make it very clear that I am not trying to blame anyone. And that I do believe that in many issues, President Galligan and the university administration have done tremendous work and that these changes will be positive for survivors. However, President Galligan, you know how I feel about the issue of discipline. I honestly forgot about this incident that occurred in November of 2020, right after the USA Today article came out, and after LSU retained Hush Blackwell. But earlier, when Samantha and Abigail were so bravely sharing, especially about parts of their stories and other survivors' stories that were left out of the Hush Blackwell report, it reminded me of a message Angel and I received from a student from Colorado State University immediately after LSU hired Hush Blackwell. This student messaged us. So basically what will happen is they'll come in, find issues enough that will make a news article look good, recommend sensitivity training, and find that no coaches need to be fired. And while Hush Blackwell did not make many direct recommendations about what should happen to employees, that does sound very familiar to what happened at LSU. On November 24th of 2020, I emailed President Galligan, Provost Haney, and members of their staff to express these concerns because while the student from Colorado State is the only one I have in writing, there are many students who we spoke with over the phone expressing similar concerns where Hush Blackwell had done investigations at their universities across the country. The email I sent them said this. Good afternoon, President Galligan and Provost Haney. Angelina Cantell here, Student Government Deputy Chief of Staff and Co-President of Tigers Against Sexual Assault. I have CC'd my other co-president, Angel Upshaw. I first want to thank both of you for your willingness to work with student leaders and hear their stories during this time. I really appreciated being able to meet with both of you last week. The campus climate has changed greatly ever since the USA Today article came out. That being said, several students from LSU and other universities have reached out to Angel and I with concerns about Hush Blackwell's previous investigations, specifically at Colorado State University and the University of Iowa. Many students from these institutions feel that their stories were not taken into proper consideration by the firm and that no real change came to their schools. This has sparked a great amount of concern among the LSU student body. We are reaching out to urge you to search for a different firm and include students in the process of choosing a new one. We appreciate your intent in wanting to hire a third-party firm, but many students are concerned about Hush Blackwell's history and feel as though they will end up prohibiting beneficial change. An investigation needs to be done, but it needs to be through an entity that students can trust will hold LSU accountable. Students do not want to see their concerns that were sparked by the USA Today article ignored. I have attached links to some of the articles that are causing students to worry and show that Hush Blackwell has a history of avoiding prompt, decisive action. I hope you will take these concerns seriously and allow students to share their voice in the process of selecting a new firm. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing back from you. In response to that, President Galligan and Provost Haney offered for Angel and I to have a meeting with Scott Schneider and Paige Duggins-Clay of Hush Blackwell. We did attend that meeting, and we were actually, I believe, the first students they ever met with. We asked them several questions pertaining to things that other students had told us and the things we were personally concerned about happening at LSU. And I will be honest, leaving that meeting, whether I was naive or really trusting and wanting to be proud of my school, I did believe that Hush Blackwell, specifically Scott Schneider and Paige Duggins-Clay, would do the best they could. And I also want to say that compared to some Hush Blackwell reports that have come out at other universities, this one is much more thorough, and I very much appreciate that. Schneider and Clay promised us that they cannot speak to what other attorneys at their firm had done, but they had no intention of covering up things at LSU. And while I want to believe them, I fully expected this report to be a complete and detailed explanation of both sides. And clearly survivors have come up here saying that their side was not listed completely. And that is what's so infuriating to me. There are so many great changes, but my fear is that these changes that we are making are being overshadowed by the negative things that have still yet to be done and by the survivors who feel their whole story is not being told. And so I guess my point in all of this is that we can make positive change, but we shouldn't commit to making positive change in some areas and not others. And we also can admit that whether or not you think that this report should have been short or super long, it clearly was already long enough. And I personally am of the belief that the survivor's story should have been included in entirety. That's all I have to say today. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And I also want to say that if any of you do work with sexual assault in the future, my organization would love to be a part of that. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank both of you again for your testimony, for your bravery, for making sure that you put this issue at the forefront and keeping us in touch with what's going on and making sure and holding us accountable. I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that you guys are looking to us to be the leaders and holding us accountable as well. So we don't have any questions now. I think Representative Marcel may want to ask a question afterwards, so I'm going to ask you not to leave. We have 2 more people to actually give testimony. So as we transition,
Thank y'all.
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership. And keep up the good work.